All right, folks, welcome back to the final segment of the Creation Science Hour and a Half. You can join us by instant messaging us, Dr. Dino Live, DRDINOLIVE, or calling 850-479-DINO, extension 136. We have one line in here, all we can answer at a time anyway, and it's full right now. So, Jared, you were telling us about isochron dating, and your conclusion now, in the last 10 days, is that the Earth is indeed much older than the creationists say.
The young Earth creationists. And then I was going to ask you, I was going to say, it's kind of funny because my position now is sort of similar to people like Lyell when they were first discovering that the Earth is very, very old, and they were trying to figure out, like, where does this fit in with what they previously believed.
Okay.
And I was going to ask you, what would you say if someone, obviously not me, or probably not me, were able to convince you that the Earth were old? Where would that put your faith?
First, I don't think that's going to happen from what I've seen so far, but if it did, I would again point out that is only the first of so many obstacles that the evolution theory is still no more probable. And you would agree there's a pretty large percentage of the U.S. population, like 30%, who does believe that God did create the world, but that it is billions of years old.
Yeah, like 38% or something like that.
Yeah, it's in the 30s somewhere. It varies from region to region. Down south, it's less. Because they're close to me, where the truth is.
Right.
So yeah, there are, that's what the intelligent design folks are. They think it's billions of years old. They've accepted that idea, but they still say it still didn't happen. It had to be a designer.
The intelligent design people kind of they range all over the place from being people who think that sort of like the Catholics who say that who was the current Pope said that whenever he was still a
Benedict or something like that.
Yeah, he said that there's no way that evolution could happen unguided or unaided, which is a pretty interesting position to take.
The Catholic Church has always had a pretty interesting position on evolution anyway, haven't they?
Well, on many things.
Yeah.
I would differ with them on just about everything.
Yeah, when I was a Christian, I did too, but I'm just wondering, like, would you still... Do you think that you could still interpret the Bible as being literally true if you accepted this old age, or is this absolutely vital to your theology?
I am for truth wherever it's found, okay? I think so far we've seen so many ideas come up that teach one thing, and within 10 or 15 years they're proven, oops, we were wrong, that I would be real slow to reject a Bible that's been around for thousands of years. So far nobody's proven anything wrong in it. I would be real slow to reject that in favor of some, Johnny-come-lately theory that hasn't stood the test of time yet. But I'm willing to listen.
But there are writings that are older than the Bible that you think are wrong.
You mean like Sumerian, Babylonian, Gilgamesh epics, stuff like that?
Sure, stuff like that, yeah.
Well, I commented on that earlier, that there's no question some stories were written down before Moses actually wrote Genesis. But Moses was writing from 10 eyewitness accounts. He had the teledos, the tablets apparently, written by the actual authors, or copies of them. So Moses had the real account, and the others, just the fact that they recorded it sooner does not necessarily make it correct.
Okay,
like grading a math test. The first kid to turn in the test doesn't necessarily have 100,
Where do you get the thing about the tablets and the different authors and the accounts? Where does that come from?
If you read Genesis, there are 10 different sections to the book. It's written by 10 different authors. The German higher critics back 150 years ago were saying there were 4 different authors, the JEPD, Yahweh, Deuterist, etc. Well, they're partially right. Only it's 10. There are 10 different authors. Look at Genesis 2:4, where it says, these are the generations of the heaven and the earth. Then you look at Genesis. If you read all of Genesis chapter 1, it mentions the word God 31 times. When you go to chapter 2, it says Lord God.
Well, those are different words.
Well, it's a different Hebrew word. It's a different author. It's what it is. It's Adam actually writing chapter 2 and 3 and 4.
That's what you think?
That's what I think. And then he signed off in chapter 5, verse 1, where it says, these are the generations of Adam. And a different author took over. Noah wrote part. Noah's sons wrote part. Jacob wrote part. So there are 10 different authors of Genesis, probably we would assume writing on clay tablets, which was common then. You bake it in the sun and you have pottery, which will last for many thousands of years. And Moses actually was just simply the editor of Genesis. There's no place in the Bible where it refers to him as the author of Genesis. It does make very clear that he's the author of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So the fact that Moses actually wrote it down, 800 years after the Babylonian epic was written down, is meaningless.
Right.
As
It
far
sounded
as
like you were saying that Moses was basically an editor, and he was just like transcribing. Okay, that's interesting. Well, what about the part where it talks about Moses' death?
Sure. Apparently Joshua took over for him and would have finished it out.
Okay, so he didn't write absolutely all of it, just most of it? Or?
Yeah, he couldn't have written it after his death, obviously, right.
Right.
Joshua would have finished it. And then Joshua went on and wrote, he finished that collection, that first 5 books, and then wrote the book of Joshua, most of that. Somebody would have had to finish. I believe it ends with the death of Joshua, if I recall. Which is common, in those days, and even today, have somebody finish up somebody else's work.
Yeah. So, well, here's something to think about. If God really were inspiring authors to write certain things, or these people had witnessed, I mean, obviously no person witnessed the first 2 chapters of Genesis, right?
Oh, the first chapter and the first couple of verses of chapter 2. Correct.
Right. Exactly.
God Himself had to tell somebody how that happened.
Exactly. So that part we can be really sure that nobody was there. So they must have been told by God, if this is what really happened, that's what happened in those events that they were supposed to write down.
Or God could have written it down and handed it to Adam. Here's how I did it.
God's handwritten Hebrew.
Well, he wrote on the 10 Commandments and handed it to Moses.
Okay.
He does know how to write, apparently.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, then how do you know that God wasn't telling the people something in the most coherent way that He could, that they would understand at the time?
That would assume that they're dumb and we're smart, and I would differ with that.
And also, I mean, it's been pointed out several times that with the ancient Hebrew language, they had ways of saying billions of years. They could have, God could have, if the whole creation took billions of years, He could have very clearly spelled that out in Hebrew to tell these people that it took myriads of years. But that's not the way it was written.
But you don't think that the word, what is the word, the Hebrew word for day that's used there?
Yom.
Yom, yeah. You don't think that ever means something other than a literal 24-hour day?
I think it does, just not millions of years.
Well, there are 1,800 references to Yom, or day, in the Bible. All of them refer to a 24-hour day, except for, I think, 3 where it says, are there not 12 hours in the day? In which case it's obviously referring to the daylight portion of a day.
There's one in Genesis 2, I believe, that says for in the day that the heavens and the earth were made.
Even that one, though.
But the heavens would have to be more than just the first day, because the Genesis 1:1 says the heaven and earth. Mm-hmm. But Genesis chapter 2 talks about the heavens, all of them.
Yeah, Hugh Ross argues that the word day might mean a long period of time, and that is just ridiculous, I think.
Why is that ridiculous, exactly? I mean, it seemed ridiculous to me as a Christian, but that's because I grew up believing in young earth creationism. I don't really know why that would be ridiculous.
Well, I don't know Hebrew, so I can't answer from the Hebrew perspective, but James Barr, professor of Hebrew at Vanderbilt University, considered one of the leading experts on Hebrew, he says, even though he's an evolutionist, okay, he says no professor of Hebrew from any major university. I'll get the quote for you here.
But while you're finding that, even if Yom, it's really regardless if it can mean more than a day or not, because
the order's wrong.
Well, in Genesis 1, you see it says the first day, and there's no place in Scripture where it talks about more than one day being coupled with a numerical, the first, second, the third.
When it's given a number, it's absolutely airtight.
It's coupled with the number and also with the evening and the morning. So it's
how do you know that? Well, here's another question. How do you know that that's not being poetic?
The first day, the second day, the third day?
Yeah.
Well, because later we have Jesus telling us in Matthew 19:4, the creation of Adam was the beginning.
Well, it was obviously the beginning of the human race.
Well, then you're adding to it. He just said it was the beginning.
Yeah,
but there are plenty of things in the Bible that you have to add to it to understand it, because the information is just not there.
Well, what about Exodus 20:11? God writing on a rock with His finger, 10 Commandments, Exodus 20. He says, "For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is." Huh? Now, you don't need any help to interpret that one.